Hello ladies and gentlemen and movie lovers of all kind, and welcome back to another Cinema Showdown Sunday. With this weekend's big movie undeniably being John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum, I figured this weekend would be a fantastic time to put its star, Keanu Reeves, into the spotlight by comparing his two biggest franchises, the Matrix Trilogy versus the John Wick Trilogy. Round 1 is going to be the cast. For the John Wick Trilogy, it's John Wick. Of course though, he is backed up by a pretty fantastic supporting cast along the way, with the likes of Willem Dafoe, Halle Berry, Ian McShane, Lance Reddick, but without a doubt, John Wick is undeniably the star of John Wick. Keanu Reeves carries this franchise on his shoulders. It has brought him back into the limelight, bigger than he has arguably ever been, and he kills it in this role, and audiences adore him as this character. Now switch over to the Matrix Trilogy, and it actually has a trio of stars that remain constant throughout the series. Them obviously being Keanu Reeves as Neo, Carrie-Anne Moss as Trinity, and Lawrence Fishburne as Morpheus. And of course we do have other supporting characters throughout the entirety of the Matrix Trilogy as well, but no one ever really remembers them. This trio though, these are the characters that we care the absolute most about because they are the centerpiece of the story. They carry the plot throughout all three of these movies, and we care about them a great deal. Although Keanu Reeves is an absolute badass in both, and both of these roles were undeniably written and perfect for him, and then after that you kind of just have John Wick, and on the other side you still have Trinity and Morpheus. Therefore I'm going to have to give round 1 to The Matrix. Round 2 is going to be the action. Essentially, what it comes down to is a more stylized action versus a more realistic style of action. The Matrix Trilogy goes for a much more stylized look, using lots of wires, slow motion, and CGI. Of course, The Matrix was the birth of bullet time, which, let's face it, when you saw it for the first time, probably one of the craziest things your eyeballs have ever experienced. Also heavily relying on Kung Fu and a few other mixed martial arts along the way. There is some pretty solid Kung Fu action going on in there, but a lot of it is super over the top. Now, although this might not be fantastic and ideal by today's standards, it definitely made sense for the story it was trying to tell. On the other hand, John Wick goes for a much more realistic action. A lot of very slick, real hand-to-hand combat, with tons of amazing wide shots, barely any cuts, and almost no CGI, aside from the occasional blood splatter. Although bullet time was one of the craziest things to ever come to the action genre, you just cannot deny how exhilarating the action is in John Wick, one of the greatest action franchises ever, and probably the greatest action franchise to be birthed within the 21st century. Therefore, I'm going to have to give round 2 to the John Wick Trilogy. Round 3 is going to be the villains. The John Wick Trilogy has been mostly hit or miss when it comes to villains, and then of course you just have wave after wave of faceless goons, pretty much just there so John Wick can pile up a body count. Switch over to the Matrix Trilogy, and there is one constant villain throughout the entire trilogy, and that is Agent Smith. One of the most iconic and memorable villains in action in sci-fi history, and aside from him himself, the agents on their own are a terrifying and menacing force. So what it comes down to for me is that John Wick has tried its hand at plenty of villains, around 7 or so give or take if you consider some of them real villains, and for me only 3 of them have been pretty good. But when you switch over to the Matrix Trilogy, you have Hugo Weaving playing Agent Smith. Therefore, I'm going to have to give round 3 to the Matrix Trilogy. Round 4 is going to be the aesthetic. The Matrix went for a very punk and of its time look. It looks weird and just out of place in today's world. Aside from that, it's mostly set in our real world, because our real world is the Matrix to them, and their real world is very mechanical and almost steampunk-like at times. I mean, what did you expect? It's literally run by octopus robot monsters. John Wick's costume design is impeccable. It's slick, it's sleek, and very eye-catching. And aside from that, you also have the Continental, which is absolutely beautiful. I love the architecture of that building, inside and out. And it's all glossed over by vibrant neon lighting. I mean, suits and ties are never going to go out of style, and they also took a much more multicultural look, as well as the different locations they travel to also changes everything. The costume design, the architecture, everything. And then of course, I am a massive sucker for the neon lighting. Therefore, I'm going to have to give round 4 to the John Wick Trilogy. And now, ladies and gentlemen, we have a 2-2 tie while we head to the 5th and final round, which is the plot. The first Matrix has one of the greatest sci-fi stories ever told, and arguably changed the way many people think and see the world. but it somehow managed to get lost along the way with its sequels. Its head just got too big for its shoulders, and the ideas just went way too outlandish. They tried to make their world and their story bigger, but in doing so, it just ended up stumbling, fumbling, and then falling flat on its face by the time the third film wrapped up. John Wick starts off incredibly simple. It's a revenge tale. Although it's a revenge tale that is extremely personal, so that idea was so simple, but it tugged on so many heartstrings, and it felt very personal for so many people. But as the sequels go on, you just dive deeper and deeper into its underworld of assassins. And no matter how far these sequels go, you just wish to keep digging and know more and more. As for The Matrix, its story and world got worse and worse with each subsequent sequel. And somehow John Wick managed to make its world bigger and better with each one of its own sequels. Its main plots can stay a little basic, but it's the world around it that keeps you so enthralled. Therefore, I'm going to have to give round 5 and the crown to the John Wick Trilogy. So if you like this video, be sure to like, subscribe, and comment, and let me know who would you have picked to win this battle. And as always, thank you so much for watching, and that's a wrap.